Lost video games, or lost media in general, is a pretty popular topic on YouTube. It offers a compelling mystery, rarely are all the facts known to the public or laid out clearly, allowing speculation and theories to thrive, and gives us a peek into an alternate universe. Plus, there's always this weird, eerie aura surrounding everything, probably enhanced by the creepy background music number 12 track that always plays in these videos. We all know about Star Wars 1313, Battlefront 3 and Mega Man Legends 3. Did you know they ported Resident Evil to a Game Boy? Not really, actually, but they tried, which is really what counts in the end. For this video, I wanted to cover some less discussed topics when it comes to lost or cancelled video games. Some, I think, have an interesting story to tell. So, before I bore everyone with this introduction, let's get started. Back in the late 90s, zombie films were well out of fashion. Besides 1997's Biozombie from Hong Kong, there were really not many options for horror fans, let alone mainstream audiences. Video games were what picked up the slack for people who liked zombie stuff, with iconic series Resident Evil and The House of the Dead both releasing their first entries in 1996. Now, 2002 marked a change for this. 28 Days Later released in cinema and opened a new wave of zombie media that would take a generation by storm. So, seeing this success, most companies looked to take advantage of this, and there was really no better place to look for inspiration than where it all started, George Romero's Living Dead trilogy. You see, back when zombie films were out of style, Romero couldn't get a film made. No studio was interested in the scripts. The only thing that would be given a chance was a remake of Night of the Living Dead, released in 1990, which was a box office failure. Studios turned to Romero's second film, Dawn of the Dead, which received a remake directed by Zack Snyder. I'm telling you this story to try and paint a picture. Zombie games had been growing in popularity, and now their films were back in mainstream attention. The zombie world that Romero had created, representing not just his legacy, but the legacy of the horror genre, was back. So, what next? To mix the two, games and films, shooters and Romero, City of the Dead. In August of 2004, a few months after the release of the Dawn of the Dead remake, American McGee announced his intentions to strike a deal between his company and Romero's Living Dead Productions. American McGee is probably best known for his Alice games, which were darker, gloomy, and crueler takes on Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. He had on board the team at Mercury Steam, who helped with the development of McGee's Scrapland. They had been working on concepts that were being passed around to prospective publishers, the tagline for this pitch being, "The goriest game ever made." A few months pass. December 2004. Hip Interactive had signed a deal with Living Dead Productions about a game called City of the Dead. It appears that behind the scenes was a bidding war, with Hip Interactive coming out on top. McGee was off the project, so too were Mercury Steam, replaced by developers Kuju Entertainment. Horror fans have been searching for the ultimate experience in gaming, and we intend to deliver it to them with the tremendous creative input of legendary director George A. Romero and Living Dead Productions. Everyone wanted a piece of the Romero pie, or really, just his name connected to their project. Crazy what a few years does to the public opinion of one person and one genre. Even people with associations to Romero were being hunted down. Tom Savini, a special effects makeup artist turned actor, collaborated with Romero on many films, including the original Dawn of the Dead. He was even given the reins by Romero for the remake of Night of the Living Dead. Savini was to voice a character in City of the Dead, giving his likeness to the developers and giving the game more legitimacy as a part of the Living Dead universe. E3 of 2005 presented a trailer for the game. City of the Dead begins as four desperate survivors travel a ravaged, zombie-infested city by helicopter. After making it to the remote island of Isla Mortale, an accident destroys their only means of escape. Unbeknown to them, the island is home to a top-secret military installation, overrun by the Walking Dead. Armed with an arsenal of traditional and futuristic weaponry, players must battle the living dead from dusk till dawn in a series of abandoned locales. With split-screen co-op missions, party mode, and 4-player online feature, City of the Dead also promises a range of multiplayer features that allow gamers to play as human or zombie. Many press outlets were also given previews. A few notable quotes from these reports. IGN described it as a totally vicious FPS that features buckets of blood interspersed with the occasional cubic ton of tenderized brain matter. They also mentioned a new game mode where the player had one single bullet and must kill as many zombies as possible. GameSpot said it really doesn't aspire to be anything more than a fast-paced arcade shooter, with the story being, quote, barely the focus. GameSpy highlighted the physics engine, flinging zombies around the map as the player commits atrocious acts of violence. There was a pretty fun idea for a multiplayer game mode. 4 players start the game, having to survive against the hordes of zombies, but if one person is bitten, they are infected, eventually becoming one of the undead. Once this happens, they are now on Team Z, having to take down their former friends. My big takeaway from these previews is the lack of focus on the story, with Kuju making a fully arcade-style shooter, emphasising plenty of gore, fun mechanics, and interesting game modes to play with 3 of your pals on one console over a delicious pizza pie. This all sounds great, but there's nothing wrong with a focus on fun. House of the Dead 4 is one of my favourite games, and that's a pure B-movie action schlock. But it's a shame that this mindless fun is attached to the Living Dead universe. With such an effort to get the Romero name attached, and even names like Tom Savini to make it more legitimate, you would have thought the developers would make the most of their connection, and try to make something which echoes Night of the Living Dead, Dawn, and Day of the Dead. Romero wasn't making schlocky zombie flicks. His films had a message. Night of the Living Dead was about human conflict in a high-pressure situation. The point was never the zombies, they were just a vessel to deliver this message. But I feel City of the Dead is the opposite, a game made to bandwagon on the then-building hype which was zombie media, attached to a prestigious and well-regarded series to hide this fact, making it seem something deeper than the pure arcade gameplay that it was in reality. In the aftermath of the remake to Dawn of the Dead, George Romero wasn't able to make his modest-budget zombie films. Studios only wanted something loud and grand, giving Romero his largest budget ever to make 2005's Land of the Dead. A film with lots of style and gore and exciting action, but little else. Just like the game, no substance. 2 months after the reveal of City of the Dead, the publisher HIP Interactive filed for bankruptcy. The developers, Kuju Entertainment, shopped the game around to many publishers, but eventually failed to get it picked up. Just like that, the game was cancelled. So, does City of the Dead leave behind a legacy in its short existence? Well, not much. Land of the Dead, Road to Fin the Screen, a prequel to Romero's Land of the Dead, was released in 2005, and is probably the closest we'd ever get. The game starts with a genuine, "Yep, I guess you're wondering how I got here" moment, which really sets the tone for everything to come. It's just an incredibly basic arcade zombie shooter. The combat is slow, you spend so much time aimlessly walking around, and whenever you're attacked the player falls and everything pauses as you get up. Absolutely no urgency or speed to anything. I didn't know it was possible to make zombie shooters boring, but they certainly did. The most fun you get is from punching zombies, knocking them to the floor. And the main character is very bizarre. This guy has such little protagonist energy. I mean, first of all, I don't even know his name, he's just the guy. In each cutscene, the guy is bewildered at everything with little sign of urgency. It's great. He's told to wait in a farm for everything to blow over, and this guy just does. It's not till he runs out of pork and beans does he decide to finally be proactive and try and find people in the big city. Also, this game refers to zombies as the Ever Hungry, which is probably the most original thing about it. Honestly, I just didn't care enough to see how he got there. I'm sorry, everyone. Thrill Kill was a 3D fighter planned for release in 1998 for the PlayStation 1, developed by Paradox Development. You play as a damned soul who's been sent to spend an eternity in an urban version of hell. But lucky for you, you've been offered a chance of reincarnation by competing in and winning a fighting tournament. Immediately, this sets up a nice premise for a fighting game. Players are already dead, so they can't die. It gets around the issue of fighting game series constantly resurrecting characters. But this story does come into play in the gameplay. Players don't have a life bar. Instead, they build up a kill meter that then lets them perform a thrill kill, immediately removing enemies from the match. It's basically the opposite of the meter in Smash Bros. The devs said this game design was meant to promote aggressive playstyles. No longer could players block and hide in corners, since a throw kill would immediately take them out of the game. Along with the hell theme, the game has a big design focus on BDSM, with many characters having leather fetish costumes. These were either played off as hypersexual or more of a joke, with any other character that didn't fit the BDSM theme usually having a very graphic design. With that came graphic violence. Many of the attack names reflect this whole philosophy. Bitch slap, swallow this, crotch crush, and head muncher. The game was originally published by Virgin Interactive. This was until the North American branch of the company was bought out by EA. Most people aware of EA's history with buying companies knows this is an immediate red flag. With the game at 99% finished and the devs preparing work for a sequel, EA decided they were not going to publish the game. They were against publishing such a, quote, senselessly violent game and risking harming their image. They even went as far as refusing to sell it to another publisher, despite there being lots of interest. You see, at the time EA wanted to promote gaming as good, clean entertainment, nothing like the senseless violence of other recent games and media in general. At the time, they were even connected to some anti-game violence politicians. Ironic that they had happily published Dungeon Keeper, a game with Satan promoted front and center on its cover, alongside Medal of Honor and American McGee's Alice in the surrounding years. Turning back the clock to the origins of Thrill Kill, Paradox was originally developing a sports game called Earth Monster, based on a Mesoamerican ball game. It's the one where you try to get a ball in a hoop while fighting off the opposing team who have the same goal. You know, the sport they played in that one scene in The Road to El Dorado. However, somewhat ironically, Virgin Interactive were the ones to push the devs towards making something much more violent. They wanted the team to lean more into more taboo subjects. Their tactic was that controversy sells, with this mindset being put to the test when they sent copies to anti-game violence protesters. They were aiming this to be this generation's Mortal Kombat, fatalities and all. After their first showing at E3, the hyperviolence caused a lot of hype and high expectations. Controversy sells, that's until you take it too far. Just before release, Thrill Kill received one of the first ever adult-only ratings for a video game. Only 3 games have ever received this, that being Hatred, Manhunt 2, and an unreleased beta of The Punisher. The game had to be toned down or else people would refuse to sell it. You're probably watching this video and wondering why you're seeing so much gameplay of a supposedly lost game. You see, once EA shut the project down, the public wasn't happy, and neither were the developers. They took matters into their own hands and gave the public what they wanted, leaking the game online. Those who were in the know got their copy, and those who weren't could steal their older brother's bootleg copy. The lost game was now found. As expected, it's a 4-player arcade fighter, however it takes place in a pretty small, compact arena. There are just 4 game modes: Arcade, which is broken down into 6 stages, ending with 2 boss fights against Judas and Marika. After the bosses, you're then treated to a heartwarming character ending. The other 3 game modes are a basic versus mode for multiplayer, a team mode, and a training mode. Not only are the fighting arenas compact, but they're also pretty basic in design. One level is called Homicide Avenue, which sums everything up nicely. It's to be expected really to allow for the PlayStation to handle 4-player combat. It also adds slightly to the chaos of the game since everyone is in such a confined space. Unfortunately, the leaked game was only a beta, with work not completely finished, and this is pretty clear with basic gameplay, modes and maps. The main charm of the game is through its characters and the ultra violence. Of the 11 playable characters, here are the highlights. Firstly is Belladonna, a dominatrix who caught her husband and sister mid-affair and ended up killing the both of them. She died after electrocuting herself with a cattle prod which she uses to fight in hell. Next is Cletus, a cannibal who died from a tapeworm infection caught from eating a victim. He attacks with the leg of one of said victims. While alive, he made a living selling human sausages. Dr. Faustus is a plastic surgeon who deliberately disfigures patients. He died after fixing a bear trap to his face for, quote, the lols. One of the two bosses is Judas, a conjoined twin, with one acting as a lower body and one the upper, flipping between the two mid-fight. Finally, the Imp, who's probably the most controversial character. He is a dwarf leather daddy who, out of rage and jealousy of those taller than him, amputated his legs and fixed spikes to them, killing himself in the process. He is the only character out of the entire cast to not have killed anyone while alive. I think this is an example of how the game sometimes veers towards cruelness. This is a character who's given a BDSM design as a joke, not in a suggestive way such as the female characters. He's also seemingly been sent to hell not because of anything he's done, but because he's a dwarf, which as said before is a pretty cruel and mean-spirited message to send and takes away from what is a light-hearted but edgy game. If you're someone who finds those character bios amusing, I'm sure you would love the game, but for those who are put off, then yeah, it's not for you. In conclusion, it's really nothing more than a fun game to play with friends. As said before, this is the first game to allow simultaneous 4-player combat. The devs knew how technically impressive this was for a game on the PlayStation 1, so didn't want to put the technology to waste. They instead reskinned the game as Wu-Tang Clan, Taste the Pain, or Shaolin Style, and released it with a different publisher. For those who don't know, the Wu-Tang Clan is a hip-hop collective formed in New York City in the early 1990s. In the game, the Wu-Tang Clan's members are reimagined as martial artists, each with their own cute little backstory. The game lore really built on themes from the group's early albums, these being the eternal fight between the Wu-Tang Clan and the practitioners of the Shaolin Kung Fu. These stories from the tracks are elevated into reality. The plot goes that the last practitioner of the Wu-Tang discipline and the master of the group was kidnapped by Chinese martial artists. The members of the Wu-Tang Clan must band together and save them, fighting across New York. The story is told over FMVs, really giving off a nice level of great old PS1 jank. In the game itself, each 3D model has a nice cute style, each feeling pretty stylized and cartoonly, bobbly almost. Unlike with Thrill Kill, it's clearly finished, having a story mode containing more varied fights. 3v1, 2v1, sometimes having to fight multiple enemies alone or alongside a teammate. The level design is also much improved, with much more detail in both the textures and the models. The whole game really feels like a big step up to Thrill Kill, and would probably present fans of Thrill Kill with a fairly big what if. Shaolin Style contains some violent kills at the end of fights, showing it truly does carry the spirit of Thrill Kill. Silent Hill Origins was released in 2007 for the PlayStation Portable. Developed by Climax Studios, it is the first mainline game in the series not to be developed by the original developers Team Silent. After Silent Hill 4, Konami decided to disband Team Silent. Konami wanted future games in the series to be developed by Western Studios. Officially, this was to make sure the next games were all more original, more unique. However, since Silent Hill Origins was a prequel and hardly original, taking a lot of characters and locations from the original game, it would be easy to think Konami just wanted to take the cheap and easy option by outsourcing the development of their games. But the work by Climax Studios impressed Konami. Climax were asked to make another PSP Silent Hill entry, However, they were more ambitious than that. They wanted to move to home consoles. Unlike some other studios at the time, they didn't turn their noses up at the mass casual audience of the Nintendo Wii. Instead, they saw the potential of the hardware and its revolutionary controls. Plus, the studio was used to working on underpowered hardware and wanted to push the graphical potential of the Wii like they had with the PSP. So, they started working on a pitch document for a game titled Silent Hill: Cold Heart, the document which I have in my hand right now. The story introduction reads, Jessica Chambers is an athletic college student whose emotional vulnerability is spilling to the surface. Her posture is defensive, her full lips are tinged blue from the cold, and her sad eyes are glossy and strained. Perhaps she has been crying recently? There's a coolness too, an icy resolve beneath the surface. Rewind to a week ago. Jessica has become dependent on her psychiatrist. She is becoming removed and emotionally distant, plagued by awful nightmares. Every night she wakes terrified, her body weighed down by a great sadness. A sense of unease and despair is slowly eating away at Jessica from somewhere deep inside. Deciding she needs a break, Jessica skips town, planning to drive across state to visit her parents and clear her head. When freak weather whips up from nowhere, she finds herself caught in a ferocious snowstorm. Seeking shelter, she tows a rescue ambulance through the blizzard, following it when it turns off the interstate. She finds herself in a faded resort town. The snow-covered sign announces it as Silent Hill. A stranded Jessica explores, hoping to find somewhere to stay the night. It soon dawns on her that something is very wrong here. She sees people and things she thought only existed in her head. The town has become a deadly nightmare fueled by her darkest secrets. A frozen maze full of characters and monsters whose icy hearts know only cruelty and violence. The player uses their Wiimote to control a flashlight. Similar to other horror games, it can be used to illuminate surroundings, hoping to navigate your way or find useful items. The beam can also be used against enemies, similarly to Alan Wake. Melee combat has a particular focus on realism. The player can make use of improvised weapons, pulling pipes from the sides of buildings or ripping out panels from fences. Players have to act out these attacks by swinging the Wiimote, with the possibility of performing special finishes on downed enemies. Puzzles are solved through real physical interactions, grabbing, twisting, yanking, turning and cranking objects, a degree of control never seen before. Honestly, there are so many examples of the developers making use of the Wiimote, it would take forever to talk about them, but here are some of the most notable. The player can react during conversation, using the Wiimote to nod, shake their head or point at objects in the environment. The Wiimote speaker is used as a phone. It behaves similarly to the radio in the original Silent Hill, playing feedback interference when an enemy is nearby. The speaker in general is utilized to build atmosphere. You can hear sounds from enemies and the environment in general, helpful for when solving puzzles and trying to sneak around. Once the map is open, the Wiimote can be used as a pen to make annotations. Not surprisingly from the title, Silent Hill: Cold Heart, there is a heavy narrative focus on the cold. Reality is transformed by Jessica's emotional state. Under periods of high stress, Jessica's internal frozen world takes over all of Silent Hill. Ice covers buildings, the streets invisible under layers of white snow, alleys impossible to spot through the thick, howling wind. Like with previous protagonists, the monsters come from Jessica's subconscious, so they too take on an icy design. Once awakened from their slumber by the presence of Jessica, their muscles crack and crunch under the ice. The ever-swirling hail and ice blizzards are not only visual, but can cause snowstorms that block Jessica's path. Players must pay attention to their body heat, using a pill to return it to normal levels. The developers aimed to create an experience that provided real psychological terror. The game creates a psychological profile based on the player's actions, taking notes of their response to events, characters, and imagery. It also notes the player's answers to questions from therapy sessions that occur during flashback segments. The game provides a custom experience tailor-made and based on this profile. Story events are impacted, along with dialogue, monster appearances, game balance, and sound cues. Players can also share this profile online, presenting their true self to the world. To add to the terror is the introduction of a realistic inventory system. Players can only carry what would realistically be possible to fit in a backpack, with each item found causing a dilemma, players having to weigh up their options. The pitch finished with a walkthrough of a potential game scenario. The player has found their way back through the streets of the neighbourhood where they first entered Silent Hill. They are standing on the intersection of Nathan Avenue and Bryant Street, in front of an abandoned truck whose loading doors are locked and sealed with a tough padlock. Written on the frost and the truck's windows is the message, "Gone to the lake." Pressing the plus button, the player opens up their map. Holding the Z button, they use the Wiimote to scroll a quick X, marking the spot on their map so they can return when they've found the key. They zoom out with the D-pad and find Toluca Lake, east of their location. Having spotted a quick route to the lake through a park, they close the map with the plus button again. The dull light of an overcast cold evening and the hazy ambience of the light snowfall gives the park a stillness that is unnerving. As the player crosses the park, they see some figures crowded around a merry-go-round. They are motionless, frosted, and pale. They are either statues or ice sculptures. The player shines their flashlight over the figures. They twitch, become monsters, their limbs cracking and crunching into unnatural configurations. The player's Wiimote begins to whine and squeal, playing Jessica's cell phone audio through a speaker. The way the creatures move makes the player feel sick to their stomach. The monsters give chase and the player runs, heading down the alley. They are weak and tired and lack a strong weapon. They are in no state to fight back. Running, the player turns and shines the flashlight at the creatures to keep them at bay. The light slows them and causes them to duck out of its beam. The player runs on, passing a number of trash cans. They push the Z button to grab hold of a can, turn by sweeping the Wiimote cursor to the left of the screen, then release the Z button and hurl the can with the heft of the nunchuck. It blocks the monsters and forces them to climb over and around, slowing their chase. The player emerges from the alley onto the lakefront. Jessica runs into the jetty, turns and realizes she has nowhere to go. More monsters appear. They slow and crowd onto the jetty. They have her trapped. Jessica weighs the options, stepping back slowly, glancing back to see that she is close to the edge. One of the monsters becomes more confident and lunges at her. She dodges back, stumbles, and steps off the jetty. She falls into the lake. The shock of the cold water is absolute. Her vision flashes white. Jessica drops below the surface, then bobs up seconds later, spluttering. She is a meter or so from the shore and in trouble. She frantically looks around, her flashlight beam bouncing off the flat surface of the lake. Off in the distance are the lights from a snowboat. Beneath her we see shapes moving in the darkness. Jessica is struggling to keep afloat, the energy leaving her body. The boat in the distance is hoisted up out of the water on a platform of sharp tendrils, its hull slowly subsumed and coated in glistering ice. The ropes of its mast coated and matted in frozen water. This metal rusts and decays, growing a carapace of dirty, lichen filth. Its guardrails twist and distort into cages. Spikes of ice splutter out of the frozen water surface, dragging sharp pieces of rusted metal and rotten wood from the lake bottom with them. The lake now looks more like an alien desert or nightmare landscape. Only the small circle of water around Jessica is unfrozen, and that is disappearing fast. Jessica closes her eyes as the ice closes in on her. She drops below the surface, comes back up again, spluttering, fighting for her life. Next thing she knows, the water is gone. The ice is frozen around her neck, trapping her like a child buried in sand. Her eyes wheel around, her head unable to move. Panic and claustrophobia fill her with terror. We flash back. A therapy session with Dr. Fairchild. He is asking Jessica about her fear of tight spaces, being unable to move. He asks a series of questions which require yes or no answers. Are you scared of tight spaces? The player nods with the Wiimote. Yes. Have you ever dreamt of being buried alive? The player nods again. Yes. Any dreams about drowning? The player shakes the Wiimote. No. Would you rather die by drowning or by being buried alive? He holds up 2 flashcards with crude drawings, one of the drowning, the other burial. Point to which one you fear most, he says. The player points the cursor to the burial card and clicks the A button. Okay, Jessica, the doctor says. Let's move on to something less morbid, a quick, simple test. He shows a series of abstract pictures and the player has to decide what it most reminds them of from a list of choices written under the sketch. First one, the player points at the word monkey and clicks. Second, the player points at I and clicks the A button again. Third, the player chooses snake. Without looking up, Dr. Fairchild bounces off this last observation. You scared of snakes? The player nods with a remote. They're really nothing to be scared of, Fairchild says. They don't attack unless provoked, you know. Well, most of them at least. We leave the flashback and fade back to the present. Jessica is encased in ice, trapped in the lake. She's starting to lose consciousness due to the temperature. A figure approaches over the ice, his footsteps crunching as he nears. The monsters are behind him, at a distance, as if they fear him or obey him. Jessica looks up. It's the man she's been seeing earlier in the bar. I know you, she whispers, breath forming white clouds, her speech broken due to the restriction of her windpipe. I know you, he smiles. He's handsome, dark-haired, something unnerving about him though. Jessica is really struggling now. Help, she rasps, confused as to why he's not seeing the urgency in the situation. He looks down. That's the devil, you know. He lifts his boots, bringing it down on the ice. Crack. Cut to black. This walkthrough is way too long to fit inside one video, so if you're interested to read more, the entire walkthrough is included in the pitch document, which is linked below, with all the sources I've used and any potential further reading. So, what happened to Silent Hill Cold Heart? Though the producers were happy with the pitch and were keen to start development, the team was worried the radical changes to the Silent Hill formula implemented in the game may not be received well by both Konami and the hardcore fans. They decided to make something closer to the original, and by close I mean quite literally the same thing. Silent Hill Shattered Memories took the story of the original game and applied many of the psychological modern horror design from Cold Heart. It features some of the similar focus on remote controls, but slightly more toned down. You can see the influence of Cold Heart on its successor more directly on the cover art of Shattered Memories, featuring the frozen body of Cheryl Mason. So, how did we find out about this game? In 2013, Climax Studios gave away copies of the original pitch document during a Facebook competition. This act of transparency with fans is the only way I am able to tell you this tale.